A few days later, a big explosion thundered in the forest again. We are shown the power of Yitong, which easily destroyed all the monsters in the area. Then she landed on the ground and Qin appeared, who praised her for her excellent work. During the invasion of the second batch of werewolves, she was much less confident, and she already hacked the fourth batch as an experienced warrior. She asked Qin where he got this technique from and assumed that he brought it from the desert lands. The protagonist replied that it was not so important. If she mastered it to the full, then in the temple of the heart of the Buddha she would do anyone. The girl thought that he had a low opinion of their temple, but she was grateful to him anyway and did not know how to thank him. Then she put her finger on his lips and asked if she could give him herself. The protagonist replied that it was better not to and was embarrassed. She thought he was very cute when he was embarrassed. She asked if they could become named brother and sister and called him brother, and Qin just laughed. Then she sat down opposite Qin on a rock and asked how much time was left before the arrival of the enemy's main army. He thought about it, because before they bring the whole army, there will be 7 false attacks. But after that, the real invasion will begin. According to his estimates, this will happen within a couple of weeks. He thought it was strange, because they had already beaten off 4 batches of werewolves, and he never got on the trail of the red scorpion. Considering that he possesses the sacred fire of the 9th rank and stood up for the protection of the temple of the heart of the Buddha, he could not help but attract the attention of the military advisor. He even considered that he had lost his former charm and became invisible to others. Zheng immediately jumped to them and reported that trouble had happened, and Qin was surprised. One of the garrisons 30 kilometers away was attacked by an elite squad of werewolves. All of them were at the 7th stage of the spiritual realm. There are students of the School of the Steel Fist and the Temple of the Great Swordsman, about 50 people in total. Almost all were killed. Qin immediately asked how many werewolves were there. Zheng replied that one of the disciples of the Temple of the Great Swordsman had left some notes before his death and invited Qin to take a look himself. He created a scroll and opened it. There was a white tiger and other werewolves. According to him, a werewolf squad of 16 individuals. After the attack, they split into 2 squads and dispersed. They are the closest to him, so they must immediately catch up with them and destroy them. He couldn't catch up with both squads alone, so he went for one and the 2 of them for the other. Tong asked Zheng Xuan to be calm, because she assured him that they would not let him down. If these are really werewolves at the 7th stage of the spiritual realm and there are only 8 of them, then together they will cope. Qin realized that everything had started, and judging by the description, these werewolves were most likely the personal guards of the military advisor. Then he created a token and said that they would be able to find their werewolf squad using this token, and asked them to take care of themselves. When they defeat the army of werewolves, they will drink together for 3 days and 3 nights, and a very joyful Yitong agreed with him. Immediately he left them and jumped very high. She immediately wanted to move out after the enemies. After that, they were on the battlefield, where everything in the area was burning. Everywhere there was a ruined land and a sea of corpses. Walking on this land, he was very angry and cursed the werewolves, but Qin knew that the invasion of werewolves in a previous life was even more bloody. He wanted to hurry up as soon as possible. They definitely need to catch up with them and finish them off. She gave Qin a token and he used it. She knew that their werewolf squad had gone to those mountains and they needed to follow them. After the duo was in the mountains, Yitong clearly felt the aura of the werewolves. She believed that they were already nearby. But immediately Qin replied with a denial, because they were already surrounded, and the girl was surprised. Immediately, a lot of white werewolves appeared. Worms and beetles also appeared from the ground, and other monsters stood in front of them. The girl realized that these werewolf tigers were not at the 7th stage of the spiritual realm at all, but at the peak. Qin added that there were not 8, but at least 16, and there are about 1,000 small individuals in the rear guard. The girl was angry, because she realized that they were trapped and cursed the werewolves. They could easily cope with 8, but they didn't understand how to deal with so many. She knew that even though Qin was able to kill the Taoist elder who was at the peak of the spiritual realm, but he was alone. She thought that in the face of the current threat, they needed to think about retreating. But this task is not easy either. Qin prepared for battle and she realized that there was no other way out. She also started using her powers. She shouted that she would clear the way for him, and he should spread the word about this situation as soon as possible. Throwing her shurikens, she turned around and said that if she died, then he should definitely avenge her by killing all the werewolves. Immediately she rushed forward, but Qin grabbed her by the hand and replied that it was too early to say goodbye to life. Did she really think that he could not cope with this gang? She knew that Qin was strong, but she didn't think he could handle so many werewolves. The protagonist noticed that she had not yet seen what he was really capable of and asked her to follow closely. The girl stood behind him and Qin summoned his spear. A huge amount of flame appeared around him. Now he will be irresistible, and asked her not to fall in love with him. The demons decided to attack him and rushed forward. Kin stood there and did not even think to move. But immediately he opened his eyes and jumped up and used the third Thunder Spear Ancestor Spirit technique. Immediately, with great speed, Kin hit the ground, which began to be destroyed. The demons were literally destroyed, and a strong shock wave went through the earth. Then a certain sphere was formed, from which even Yitong was hard. After it was over, Kin told her that everything was ready. The girl was surprised that he destroyed everyone in one move. He told her he would be irresistible. The third Thunder Spear already belongs to the heavenly level weapon, and using it together with the heavenly level technique, the effect is simply amazing. The whole scene was watched by a scorpion that stood on a rock above Kin and Yi. She was surprised that they didn't have an elite squad just like that. 16 personal guards of the Tiger General and 1,000 small individuals fell from one blow. Immediately, she raised her tail and shot a needle with poison into it, which hit right in the knee. She was glad she could get in. They didn't expect Kin Yue to be so strong, but at least it was good that the operation was a success in the end. The stronger Kin is, the more benefit he will bring to their race. One day he will turn this spear against his own and will stand astride a mountain of the bodies of the people he killed. He will be their main weapon in the war against humans. After the villain began to climb underground and Kin looked right there, he was glad that everything was ready. The girl asked him what had happened and the protagonist told her that it was time for them to return. The girl felt that there was something strange. After that they were in the garrison. Yitong shouted at Zheng Xuan because he had provided them with erroneous information and therefore they were in danger. Zheng apologized to her and assured her that this would not happen again. He asked if Brother Kin would forgive him. He put his hand on it and replied that of course, because soon they would become like brothers. And when solving big problems without fraternal support anywhere, Zheng was happy and agreed with him. Well, Yi looking at them was surprised and did not understand what was wrong with them. Zheng glared at him and offered to talk in the evening. And Kin also looked at him and replied that of course I agree with him. Already at night, Zhen was standing on a cliff, above a cliff. Immediately, Kin himself appeared, turning around. Zhen told him that they would soon become the right and left hands of the Tiger General. Kin agreed with him, so he counted on mutual support. Zhen noticed that he said it perfectly. Kin asked when he would be able to take him to him. Zhen asked him to take his time, because everything has its time. Soon the Tiger General will organize a massive attack. They will have to fight it off in order to gain respect among people, and when they achieve unquestionable authority here, they will earn an audience with the Tiger General. Kin realized that that tiger did not become a general for nothing. He knows how to wait. Also, he doesn't want to rely on Zheng Xuan alone. He walked up to Kin, hugged him and said that he would now tell him in detail about the general's immediate plans. He started talking to him and Chu Lin appeared out of the water, who was watching them. He realized that Zheng Xuan was now on the side of the werewolves and not only him, but also Kin Yu. He believed that heaven truly favored him. At first, he expected to take control of the temple of the Buddha's heart with the help of Bai Feifan and his man inside the temple. But now he won't even need them and immediately disappeared into the water. Again they show us the garrison. Yitong was sleeping sweetly in her bed, and Kin was sitting behind the fire and thinking that in order to find the Tiger General, he needed to break through to the second stage of the Destroying Kingdom and summon the Qian Yu Bull. And when he finds the base of the general and his sixers, he will smash everything there into splinters. Then Kin used the force and a certain aura appeared around him. He opened his eyes and used his inner vision. He looked at some crystals and realized that it was time for him to take those 8th grade pills. If you take such pills at once, you can immediately break through to the 3rd stage of the Destroying Kingdom. He had originally planned to strengthen his body before the breakthroughs, but now he didn't have time for that. Immediately, Kin's heart ached and he clutched at himself with his hands. His muscles began to tear and his limbs began to break. He thought it was a side effect of the premature breakthrough. Then the dragon Yazi appeared behind him and his clothes began to burst, but his hands seemed to heal and another purple aura appeared. Immediately, he began to be covered with dragon armor, but only now on his entire body. After a moment, Kin's transformation was complete and even his face changed. He used his inner vision again, and the crystals seemed to pour their energy into him. He easily absorbed all the energy, and then the sphere descended to the ground and immediately Kin appeared, which seemed to destroy the dragon's armor. His body became even bigger and pumped up. The protagonist just exhaled, because he did it all. He is now at the 3rd stage of the Destroying Realm. He realized that it was time for him and immediately called his scroll and asked his friend to come out. He began to summon a certain bull that stood in front of him. He greeted him and began to absorb the bull itself into himself. Immediately, a new mark was formed on Kin's forehead, the mark of a bull. Then Kin opened his eyes and began to scan the whole area very quickly. He literally scanned it. Immediately, Kin discovered the Tiger General and stopped his power. He went up to Yitong and started to wake her up. The girl immediately got up and thought that it was time for the guard. The protagonist turned away so as not to embarrass the girl and replied that he would need to leave for one night. Now she is in charge of the tent. The girl agreed with him. After that, they show us the cave of the Tiger General. He praised Scorpio for his excellent work, because having a natural swordsman and the owner of the sacred fire of the 9th rank at their disposal, their plans are doomed to success. Preparatory measures have been completed, and then only the massacre. The girl congratulated her general, because the victory in this war will be primarily his merit. Tiger told her that if he was promoted to the heavenly general, she would roll like cheese in butter. Then he grinned and put his hand under his face, because being a combat general and a military advisor at the same time, no one will compete with him in promotion. But Kin immediately appeared, who told him that he rejoices early. The general and Scorpio were very surprised and indignant at his appearance. She turned around and asked who he was. The protagonist replied to her that she had seen him just yesterday, and today she can't remember. Scorpio realized that it was still Kin. The tiger felt that he had miscalculated, because the power of the sacred fire of the 9th rank was higher than his expectations. He pretended to be under the influence of the red scorpion, and at the same time he found a way to discover their location. Tiger couldn't help but admit that Kin was much tougher than Zhang Chuan and slowly got up from the throne. A huge tiger general was already standing in front of Kin and asked that since he had come here alone, Kin thought he could handle him alone. Kin was sure of it. The tiger is well aware of its origin. His family gave all their strength for the common good of the human race, but in gratitude for this, people also exterminated it. Therefore, he did not understand why he continued to speak on the side of people. People are very greedy and mean by nature. For the sake of achieving personal goals, they do not disdain any means. Such a race has no future. People only continue to fight with each other, decompose and degrade, and the struggle for a piece of land will be their doomsday. But the monsters are different. They have the unanimity of the upper and lower classes, and one day they will unite all the territories under one authority. And then peace will come to the whole world. He asked Kin to abandon these people and join them. None of the werewolves would discriminate against him because of his background. Once he joins them, he will be a loyal friend and brother of the werewolf race, a member of the family. He wanted Kin to join their ranks for the sake of a common great future. Kin asked if this was his last word. He did not deny that it turned out to be exciting, but he has an irreconcilable enmity with the werewolves, and today he will kill a tiger. The general exhaled and added that Kin only strengthened his belief that people are hopeless. Immediately, he went ahead to Kin with the words that he was sorry to lose such an excellent warrior for whom he had big plans, but he would have to kill him. He stomped hard with such force that the ground collapsed, but Kin easily stopped his kick and grabbed his foot. The protagonist finally realized that the tiger was damn strong, and it seemed to him that he was at the peak of the destroying kingdom. Tiger noticed that Kin was a tough guy, but he didn't push such people either. He fired a kind of purple ray at Kin, which flew at supersonic speed, so that Kin already bled from his ears. The protagonist has become quite difficult. Immediately, the tiger caught the moment and hit Kin with his foot at a tremendous speed that he flew forward. Then he immediately added a punch with his hand on the Kin. He literally drove it into the wall. Then the tiger turned around and noticed that Kin was an excellent warrior, special by human standards. He was sorry to kill him, because he deserves to be treated with respect after his death. He asked the scorpion to distribute his meat to their relatives so that they could eat, and this would be a tribute to him. The girl agreed with him and started laughing as she approached Kin, but immediately discovered that he was alive and was very surprised. The tiger also turned around and was surprised. The girl considered that Kin is not a man, but rather a beast of the wasteland. The protagonist began to transform and he asked what it was. They no longer want to see him in their ranks. The tiger was surprised when he heard the wasteland beast did not understand why he was allowed to leave his post. Kin stood up and knocked out the scorpion with one blow, and he replied that he had gone AWOL and they didn't care about it. Tiger realized that Kin was a wasteland beast that had been recruited by humans. He understood that he needed to report to the Empress as soon as possible, because the wasteland beasts and humans would form a military alliance, then their position would deteriorate dramatically. He began to create a portal and, leaving, said goodbye to Kin, because Oin will meet again. The protagonist grinned and jumped right over the tiger, which surprised him very much. The protagonist asked him if he wanted to escape, to which the tiger replied that he did not want to waste time trying to finish him off, but apparently, if he was not killed, he would not let him leave. The tiger summoned a huge red axe and shouted to Kin to get it. He rushed straight at him and Kin also ran forward. They both faced blows. After a moment, it turned out that Kin had beaten off his axe with his bare hands and it cracked, from which the tiger was confused. Then they both jumped away from each other. Tiger was shocked that Kin was able to smash the battle axe presented by the Empress with one blow. Then the tiger looked up and was even more surprised. After all, there was already Kin above him, who was preparing to attack him. The protagonist said that the general underestimated him, and in war conditions such mistakes are unforgivable. He punched the tiger so hard that it flew into the wall. But then he was surprised, because a huge strong shockwave swept in front of him. Kin managed to block the attack, but literally flew away from a strong blow. Someone with a tail started coming out of the smoke. It was a modified white tiger, cursing the wasteland beast. Kin noticed that the peak of the destroying realm was a serious force. The general rushed at him with all his might. They both hit their hands and began to inflict a series of attacks on each other. After a while, the protagonist's armor began to burst, from which he was very surprised. The tiger continued to add the tempo of the blows, and they hit each other with all their strength, so that there was a huge flash and an explosive wave. Kin flew into the wall, and blood dripped from him. Kin was badly beaten, but he said that the tiger general's death hour had come. The monster stood up and told him not to write him off ahead of time. If that was all he was capable of, he wouldn't have reached the rank of general. A huge fire mark appeared on his forehead. He got on his knee and seemed to transform again. His wounds disappeared, and he added that he hadn't even used his Born Tiger Rage skill yet, which makes him 3 times stronger for a short time. Without this skill, Kin's fighting power is comparable to his, but not anymore. He immediately appeared next to Kin, which surprised him. He believed that Kin was no longer his rival and punched him in the stomach, so that he even spat out blood. After he bit him on the shoulder, Kin knew that it was impossible to delay and hit the tiger with his forehead on the nose, and he flew off a couple of meters. Kin immediately unleashed force into his fist and released a lot of energy into the tiger, but he was able to dodge the attack. He used the body binding technique, and a huge avatar of a white tiger appeared around him. He tied Kin up so that he couldn't even move. He understood that this reception would cause him trouble. The tiger began to run at Kin, and when he was already near him, he shouted that this bastard from the desert lands should die. Then the Phoenix Seal was activated, which immediately appeared over Kin, and all stiffness disappeared. The tiger did not understand what it was and immediately received a blow from Kin, from which he flew far ahead. The tiger already thought that the boy would not get out, but once he asked the Empress to give him her strength. Immediately, the silhouette of his Empress appeared around him, who endowed him with a mysterious power. Tiger noticed that the next blow would decide the outcome of the fight. Kin summoned the spear and replied that he was satisfied with it. There was the power of 4 desert animals inside the spear at once. The tiger flew up and created a huge orange ball, a sphere that developed to an incredible size. Kin prepared to attack, and the tiger used fire condensations. And the protagonist of the 4th thunderstorm, Kobe the Curse of Hell, Kin launched his strike right through the sphere. The earth even began to break under the protagonist, and the tiger shouted for him to die. He let a sphere into him, and the earth was destroyed even more. The tiger was glad that he finally overcame him. He began to laugh a lot, but the protagonist noted that it was too early for him to rejoice. Tiger was surprised that the hero was still alive. Immediately, Kin pierced his body with a spear, and they literally drove into the ground. Afterwards, Kin stood over his defeated enemies and pulled out his spear. Tiger realized that he had lost. There was a huge fire around them, and Kin noticed that killing a werewolf at the peak of the destroying kingdom turned out to be a very tedious task. He immediately fell to the ground from overwork. A couple of days later, Kin woke up in the same place. A bright light shone on him, and when he got up, he thought that he had slept for about 3 days. He was glad that at least he managed to kill the tiger general. At this point, the invasion of the werewolves should choke. The human race will be able to sleep peacefully. Then he summoned his ring, and immediately new clothes appeared on him. He wanted to return to the camp as soon as possible, because due to his long absence, Yitong probably does not find a place for himself. He immediately seemed to fly out of the cave. After that, he found himself in the camp, but there was no fire, as was Yitong. He thought she might have gone looking for him. Immediately, people appeared who shouted at Kin and wanted to grab him. He asked who they were. The guy shouted that Kin could not escape, because the whole forest was surrounded, and he had no choice but to surrender. Kin replied that although he did not know what their claims against him were, he always had a choice. The guy shouted that Kin was now with the werewolves and he had betrayed the human race, and therefore they wanted to capture this bastard. Immediately, the guys ran at him, and Kin used the dragon Yazi, who roared at the top of his voice, and the ground cracked under Kin. The dragon shouted at all the warriors, and they just flew away and lost consciousness. Kin exhaled and asked everyone to just explain what had happened, but it was as if they weren't listening to him and were still trying to grab him. Kin summoned the spear and was already serious. He swung the weapons and they flew away from them again. Bai appeared and said that Kin had disappointed him. He landed on the ground and added that he considered him a decent person and accepted him as a brother, but he did not expect this from him. He didn't understand how he could betray the human race and form an alliance with the werewolves. He understood why only Kin knew about the werewolf invasion. He put on this whole show to lead them by the nose. He thought that Kin wanted them to act on his orders, but he was glad that his plot had been discovered. He asked Kin to give up and ask for forgiveness and repent. Then he promised that no one would desecrate his corpse. Kin laughed, because he accused him of colluding with werewolves. Bai was surprised that Qin denied everything even in the face of iron evidence. At such a young age, he has a sacred fire of the 9th rank and is already at the stage of the destroying realm. The loot found in the desert lands is just an excuse. Bai figured that everything Qin has, he will get from the werewolves. He only offered him to surrender without resistance. Qin laughed again and replied that he still hadn't heard any evidence. The protagonist assured that he had never betrayed the race of people and lived for people and would die for people. He wondered if he was acting on behalf of the Temple of the Buddha's Heart. Bai replied that not only from this temple, because influential people from the Polar Sun clan will soon arrive here. Qin heard him and immediately Yitong ordered him to shut up. Fu Yao, Yitong, and Qianshan immediately appeared. He told Bai that Qin was not like that. She would not believe that he was a traitor. The head of the clan also trusts him completely. Qianshan asked Bai what he was talking about, because he was clearly told, until Qin's guilt was proven, they should treat him as one of them. Therefore, she did not understand by what right he was talking to him in such a tone. Bai replied that he was talking to him like that because he was a traitor and in order to divert suspicion from the Temple of the Buddha's Heart. He believed that if they treated him well, other people might think that their head had put him up to it. He already thought that the head was in league with Qin, but Fu Yao replied that it was too much to say such nonsense. Immediately there were others who said they thought the fish was rotting from the head. Immediately, the head of the Polar Sun clan, Pan Kao, appeared, who said that the Temple of the Buddha's Heart had made an alliance with the werewolves and laughed. Also standing next to him was the first spiritual daughter of Yan Zhoubing and Chu Lin. Han hoped that the Temple of the Buddha's Heart would be able to give an impeccable explanation of how a traitor turned out to be among them. Immediately, a huge crowd of people appeared behind them. The guys said that they believed that Qin was the main talent for the last 100 years. And he turned out to be a henchman of the werewolves. They did not believe that he was just a gifted boy with the sacred fire of the 9th rank and easily took and killed the Taoist elder. Werewolves have always paid traitors handsomely. Fu Yao turned around and told Qin that since they accepted him, she should trust him by default, but he should tell them where he had been for the past few days. Qin replied that the werewolf invasion was led by their military advisor, General Tiger. 3 days ago, he figured out his location and killed him. Also, the protagonist was badly injured, so he woke up only 3 days later. Bai started shouting, because no one would believe that Qin was able to kill the werewolf military advisor. He realized that Qin decided to deny to the end and ordered his men to bring Zhang Xuan here. The man agreed and they dragged the wounded and bound Zhen. Bai told him to tell the truth, because then he wouldn't kill him. He threw him in front of Qin and ordered him to tell everything he knew. Zhen explained that he was really a traitor. He was very guilty in front of all of them, but he also sold his soul to werewolves like Qin. The protagonist was surprised by his words and a certain guy shouted that Qin's friend had already turned him in. What would he come up with in his own defense now? They wanted to kill Qin, skin him and expose him to the scorching sun, the only way they could cool their hatred for him. Qin clenched his fists. He realized that all their moves were calculated, and that there was no way to do without a bloodbath here. Yitong shouted that it was a blatant lie. She knew that it was a planned provocation. She always knew that something was wrong with Bai and now she understood everything. He was a man of the Polar Sun clan and had set it all up. Bai smiled and replied that he did not take offense at her for these stupidities, as he understood that Qin had messed up her brain. He folded his hands and told the head that the evidence of Qin's guilt was presented and asked her to give her verdict. She did not know what to answer and Pan shouted that she had no right to make a verdict. He believes that the Temple of the Buddha's Heart is an engaged party. Today he will take Qin with him, and in a few days he will call together all the neighboring temples for his trial. The Temple of the Buddha's Heart should not interfere with the investigation of this case. To do this, they will have to transfer control over all their key resources to them. When their innocence is confirmed, they will return them. Xu Lin noticed that Qin had not only brought trouble on himself, but was also setting up the whole temple. Qin realized that this was Xu Lin's plan. He couldn't help but admit that everything was thought out clearly, but did they really expect to be able to capture Qin? Xu Lin didn't think that Qin would dare to even try to escape.